In this video, I play 2-5 cash at the Aria.
I play many big hands and get put in a very tough river spot with pocket aces. In the first real hand of the night, I have pocket threes and there is a hijack raised to $20. The button calls and we are in the big blind and happily complete. The flop comes queen, 3, deuce. I flop middle set. I start by checking over to the hijack who bets $35. The button folds and I am going to waste no time building a pot here. With a flush draw on board, there's a lot of turns that could slow our action, so I raise to 125. My opponent makes a call and the turn comes the 8 of spades. This is a great card for me and I continue by betting 215 into about 310. My opponent makes a call once again and the river comes the 8 of hearts. We now have a boat and I only have one move. I jam all in for about $400. My opponent doesn't take too long before making the call. She will later say she had ace queen for top pair. We will double up early on in this session and take down an over $1,500 pot. In the next hand, I have king queen off and raise to $15 on the low jack. The hijack and button make the call. The flop comes queen 9 4, 2 diamonds. With top pair here, I'm just going to bet. I make it $30 and just the button makes a call. The turn comes quite good, the king of hearts. With top 2 pair, I don't think there's a good reason to bet here. If I bet, my opponent will often just fold. Plus, since we have a diamond, it's less likely they have a flush draw. I check and my opponent checks back. The river comes the 9 of hearts. This is a bit of a scare card as my opponent could definitely have a 9. With that said, we still have 2 pair and we certainly can't just check and lose any value. I bet $30 and my opponent just calls. We show and as expected are good. Maybe my opponent had a weaker queen or smaller pair. In the next hand, I have the beautiful queen jack of spades and the hijack raises to $20. I am in the small blind and I 3-bet to $70. My opponent makes a call and the flop comes king 7 4, all clubs. I bet $55 and my opponent makes a call. The turn comes the king of spades. With no club, I don't think this is a great bluff candidate, so I slow down and check. My opponent bets 120. With this action, I make a pretty easy fold and we move on to the next one. In this next hand, I have the best starting possible hand, aces. There is an under the gun raise to $15 and the hijack makes a call. We are in the cutoff and 3-bet to $70. Just the under the gun player, who is the same person we doubled up through with pocket threes, ends up making the call. The flop comes 6 5 deuce rainbow. My opponent checks to me and I think they're going to have mostly overpairs here. For this reason, I think it makes sense to size up, so I bet $85. To my surprise, my opponent check raises me to $225. I think it's possible they could be overvaluing a hand like pocket jacks or pocket queens here. I'm definitely going nowhere. I make the call. The turn comes the 7 of clubs. With about $600 in the pot, my opponent does not slow down. They bet $325 or about half pot. At this point, my opponent is saying they have a set like pocket sixes or pocket fives, maybe pocket deuces if they play that, and of course possibly 9-8 suited for a straight. While this line is so far pretty strong, I cannot fold quite yet. I make the call. The river comes the 3 of spades. Now any 4 makes a straight, although I don't think this is too relevant in this hand. My opponent ends up putting us all in for about $950. To check raise the flop, bet the turn big and jam river. This is very strong, but I do have some things to consider. Would my opponent call a 3-bet pre with one of these small pairs? Could they possibly be overvaluing jacks through kings? With the club flush draw coming on the turn, do they possibly have missed clubs? Are they still fuming versus the hand where we had a boat versus their top pair and we doubled up? I really didn't know what to do in this spot. Maybe generally it should just be a fold because this line is just so strong, but I felt my hand was best, so I decided to call. My opponent slowly turns over pocket nines. They have a bluff. Props to them for really going for it. This was a really good bluff and one that I think would work in most cases. Just not in this one as we scoop an over $3,000 pot. We are feeling good about making that call in this last hand and we have king jack of hearts in this next one. There is an under the gun raise to $15 and we 3-bet on the cutoff to $50. My opponent makes a call and the flop comes 4 3 3, 2 hearts. With the second nut flush draw and 2 overs, I c-bet for $45 and my opponent makes a call. The turn comes the 6 of hearts. We bink the flush and we are feeling great. My opponent checks and I bet 130 into 190. Surprisingly, my opponent check raises me to $400. With the second nut flush, I am going nowhere. I make the call. The river comes a deuce of clubs. With almost $1,000 in the pot, my opponent announces $750. I'm actually still pretty happy at this point. So happy that I even considered jamming. But being that my opponent could possibly have a boat like pocket fours or pocket sixes, or the ace high flush, I of course just have to make the call. My opponent ends up showing ace queen of hearts. They do in fact have the nut flush, as we have the second nut flush and see a massive cooler. We will lose a good chunk of what we just won with the pocket aces. In the next hand, I have 9-8 of spades and there is an under the gun raise to $15. I decide to make the call on the cutoff and the flop comes king 8 deuce 2 clubs. My opponent continues and bets $20 into about 30. With middle pair, I make the call. The turn comes the 3 of hearts. My opponent continues and bets pot $75. Being that we have spades, we unblock clubs and hearts, so I thought at the time this was a good spot to call. The river comes the 6 of diamonds. This time my opponent bets 175 into about 220. With similar logic as compared to the turn, the flush draws miss, so I think we have a good bluff catcher. I end up making the call and my opponent shows ace king off. After studying this hand later, I think this was a complete blunder. I threw this into GTO Wizard and we can see that this is just a fold pre-flop. I'm improving my cash game every day with programs like this, but I will say I am more studied in tournaments. In the next hand, I have queen jack of spades and there is an under the gun shuttle on for $10. The under the gun one player limps $10 and we raise to $50 in the low jack. The cutoff, hijack, and under the gun one player end up calling. We go 4 ways to a flop that comes jack 10 10. Action checks to me, and with top pair on this paired board, I'm just going to down bet for a 1/3 sizing of $70. The cutoff and under the gun one player make the call. The turn comes the 5 of spades. At this point, I need to be a bit concerned with someone having a stronger jack than me or a 10. This time when the early position player checks to me, I check and so does the cutoff. The river comes the 10 of diamonds. We now have a boat and chop with any other jack X. With over $400 in the pot, the early position player bets 135. At the time, I was thinking I guess they could have a 10. I don't really know if there's much reason to raise here, so I end up just making the call and the cutoff folds. My opponent will show queen 9 off for a missed open-ended straight draw. Very ambitious bluff by him that I think had about a 0% chance of working. In the next hand, I have jack 4 of diamonds and there is an under the gun one raised to $20. The small blind calls and we complete in the big blind for $15 more. The flop comes ace 7 6 1 diamond. The small blind checks, I check, and the original raiser checks back. The turn comes the 8 of diamonds. This time, the small blind leads for about pot, $55. Now with a flush draw and a gut shot, I'm going nowhere, I make the call, and the early position player also calls. The river is the king of diamonds, we backdoor into a flush. This time, the small blind checks. I certainly do not want to let this check through, but I also do not want to bet a size that is too large that will just get it fold. I make it $100. The early position player folds, but the small blind makes the call. We show and are of course good. My opponent possibly had 2 pair, a set, or something like a straight, like 10-9. Luck was on our side in this one. This next hand is the first one at a new table. I have king jack off and there is an under the gun shadow on for $10. The under the gun 1 and under the gun 2 players limp the $10. I'm in the cutoff and raise to $60. The small blind, under the gun shadow, and one of the limpers make the call. The flop comes interesting, 10 10 10. Action checks to me, and I think I'm just going to have such a range advantage here being the only pre-flop raise. I decide to use this to my advantage and put the pressure on and bet $80 into about 240. We eliminate most of the field as just the small blind makes the call. The turn is no help as it comes the 4 of hearts. This opponent only has about $600 effective to start the hand. My guess is they have something like ace high or a small pair at this point. I think we can get these better hands to fold by putting in one more barrel. It doesn't have to be too big relative to the size of the pot, so I make it 225. I am praying that I do not get jammed on, and I don't, as my opponent ends up folding. We end up getting a nice double barrel bluff through in a multi-way spot where I don't think most people find a bluff. In the last hand of the night, I have pocket jacks, and there is an under the gun shadow on for $10. We raise under the gun 1 to $30. Back around to the straddle, who is the only caller. The flop comes great for pocket jacks. Ace, king, queen. Psych! My opponent checks to me, and I'm just going to range bet here. I make it $20. They make the call, and the turn comes the 3 of clubs. This time when they check, I check back. The river is the jack of hearts. A bit bittersweet, as now we beat any ace X, king X, or queen X, but we do not beat a 10, as of course that would make a straight. With $100 in the pot, my opponent bets $50. For this price, we are never folding. I end up calling, and my opponent will show 10-9 off for a straight. With that, it is now late in the night, and it is time to cash out.
What's up guys, we were in this session for 1K total, cash out for 2960. So pretty good night. As you saw, I think we played pretty well. The king jack of hearts hand, that was very unlucky. The aces hand, maybe I should have been folding the river, but it worked out. I think we had a read on her. She was trying to bluff us from, she was angry from the set that we hit on her. So that worked out. And then I think we played pretty well on all the other hands. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, let me know what you thought. Thanks for watching. Peace.